Brendan? Brendan. We're live. Order. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee meeting to order. This morning we have the Department of Seniors with us as a witness to discuss Nova Scotia's action plan for an aging population and age-friendly communities grants. I'd like to remind everyone to place their phone on silent so that we do not have interruptions. We'll start with introductions, beginning with Mr. McKay.
Good morning and welcome. Hugh McKay, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Good morning and glad to see you back, Mr. Chair. Brendan McGuire, Halifax Atlantic.
Good morning, I'm Benjamin Jessam and I represent Hammonds Plains Lucasville.
Good morning, Suzanne Lonis-Croft, MLA Lunenburg, the capital of seniors.
Good morning and welcome, Gordon Wilson, MLA for Clare Digby.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
And good morning, I'm Lisa Roberts, the MLA for Halifax Needham, and my colleague from Dave Wilson from Sackville-Cobequid will be late due to an incident on the bridge this morning, but he'll be joining us.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness. In your chair, we have the Auditor General's office with us this morning, Mr. Pickup.
Good morning, Michael Pickup, Auditor General.
And Mr. D'Entremont, you can begin with your opening comments after each of you has a chance to introduce yourselves.
Simon D'Entremont, Deputy Minister of Nova Scotia Department of Seniors.
Morning, Faizal Nanji, Executive Director, Department of Seniors.
Mr. D'Entremont.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to talk about the work of the Department of Seniors and our progress to date in the first year of the SHIFT Action Plan. Before I begin, thank you to Faizal Nanji, my Executive Director, for joining me here today. I'm especially glad to have the opportunity to be here now as we mark the first anniversary of the launch of SHIFT, Nova Scotia's first comprehensive action plan on aging. SHIFT identified a dozen priority commitments with more than 50 specific actions, an ambitious plan by any measure. But I'm proud of the work of our team and our colleagues throughout government and our stakeholders across the province. They've really stepped forward to own SHIFT, and in doing so, we've come a long way to ensure that older Nova Scotians in all their diversity are reflected in the work we do every day. SHIFT is based on 3 pillars, and these are the themes we heard over and over during our consultations with Nova Scotians in 2016. That we need to value the social and economic contribution of older adults, that we need to promote healthy, active living and support aging in place connected to community life. If you're familiar with our plan, you'll know that most of the actions in SHIFT lived outside the Department of Seniors. Our role has been to help bring people together, ensure their needs and interests of older adults in all their diversity remain top of mind across government to create an overall policy framework for coordinated action. I mentioned that SHIFT was an ambitious undertaking, but I'm pleased with the progress we've made against our plan in the first year. Let me give you just a few highlights. First of all, on seniors' health, while treating illness after it happens is important, a key theme in our consultation was keeping seniors healthy in the first place. While we have followed closely the expansion of the Caregiver Benefit Program, the new investments in home care and additional support for family doctors, there's much more we can do for healthy living. In line with SHIFT, and especially our goal to promote healthy, active living, are projects like the Mobile Food Market. The Mobile Food Market is a service that provides fresh, affordable fruits and vegetables to communities where food security is a real issue. For older Nova Scotians, food security can become an issue even in communities where fresh and wholesome food is abundant, due to low and fixed incomes and lack of transportation access, to name a few. $110,000 investment will maintain the Mobile Food Market's current locations and help the service expand outside of HRM. On January 1st, the Department of Finance also increased the basic personal exemption for low-income Nova Scotians. As a result, taxes will be reduced for more than 500,000 people, with more than 60,000 Nova Scotians no longer paying provincial income tax. This will have a real impact on the lives of many older Nova Scotians living on low and fixed incomes. Which brings me to another important action out of SHIFT, and that is a $2.4 million funding commitment to expand community transportation options across the province. My colleagues and I hear time and time again about the importance of reliable, affordable, community-based transportation to keeping older Nova Scotians connected in the communities where they age. As a result of the funding commitments made under the Federal Social Infrastructure Fund, new affordable housing units are planned for Mahone Bay, Amherst, Yarmouth, Wolfville, Greenwood, and in the Sydney area over the next 2 years. The Mahone Bay project, for example, is currently under construction and will provide 26 affordable housing units, including 3 units that are barrier-free. The project is being built with enhanced seniors features. For example, all units will have walk-in showers in lieu of bathtubs. On the workforce side, Labour and Advanced Education has invested $200,000 to expand the Works for You program to better support older Nova Scotians who are transitioning back into the workplace or find themselves unemployed. We've also worked with our colleagues at LAE to create and offer a free online training module for employers about the benefits of hiring and retaining older workers and creating an age-friendly workplace. All of this has been done in partnership with our department, but also led by others, which demonstrates the reach and impact of SHIFT. Our action in the Department of Seniors out of SHIFT that has been led by seniors, for example, is creating a new social innovation lab, Nova Scotia Gov Lab, we call it. 2 members of our team are dedicated full-time to advancing the work of the lab, where 24 quote-unquote fellows are working hard to understand the complex issue of aging, of an aging population, and to present system design solutions that address those issues. In plain language, that means we have 24 Nova Scotians from all backgrounds and walks of life engaged in thinking about how our world must change to support a population that would be older from now on, and bringing forward ideas rooted in research that can help close the gap. This is really incredible, innovative work, and I look forward to sharing the lab's progress with you in the coming months and years. Our age-friendly community grants have also supported many important projects over the last several years. This year, we're supporting 47 projects in communities throughout Nova Scotia, from conferences, awareness projects, tools, programs, services that support physically active lifestyles and strong connected communities. This is important work, and I hear from our senior stakeholders every day that it's continuing to move the dial in this province. One of the challenges outlined in SHIFT is proving a harder nut to crack, and that's ageism. Ageist attitudes and stereotypes in our society perpetuate the notion that getting older is a problem rather than a natural part of life. Ageism is ingrained in our thinking and our ways of relating. We see it anytime someone is thought to be too old for something, a new job, a physical challenge, a style of clothing. And we hear it seemingly lighthearted jokes like, "I'm having a senior moment." But this is still a challenge for us. What has been so clear to me and my colleagues during the creation and implementation of SHIFT is that ageism is so pervasive, the effect so powerful that we come to accept it as fact. I will say my work on SHIFT and in this portfolio has opened my own eyes to these biases, but my small and mighty team at the department and our partners in the community are working hard every day to change the dialogue on aging. As you can see, we've made steady progress in our first year with lots left to do in the years ahead. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about the exciting work underway throughout government in support of SHIFT, and I look forward to answering your questions this morning.
Thank you. Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a budget for SHIFT?
Thank you. Because the work of SHIFT is spread out around many departments, when we launched SHIFT, we announced a $13.6 million investment that had been recorded at the time. Since then, we've made incremental investments, and the budgets that followed, for example, included extra investments to deliver on the commitments of SHIFT.
Do you have any idea of how much?
We're probably, some of the things are hard to determine right down to the dollar. For example, the increase in the basic personal exemption would cost, in tax revenue, is about $85 million, but the exact proportion to seniors, for example, is a number that we've been trying to get and is a little bit hard to nail down exactly. But certainly it would be in the several tens of millions of dollars.
Okay, thank you. When the budget was introduced in September, there was a nice sign beside the Minister of Finance. It had the 5 priorities of the government: healthier people and communities, investing in early years in education, safe and connected communities, inclusive economic growth. That's 4, and then at that time there was also a 5th one that said caring for seniors. But when the most recent budget was introduced, that same sign was beside the minister talking about the priorities of government, but the caring for seniors was gone. The 5 priorities that the government had in September had reduced to 4. Did you know that the caring for seniors had dropped off as a priority?
I didn't see those materials and can't comment on them as I'm not aware.
I think it was kind of, I think it was kind of something that the government was kind of hoping would slide by and nobody would and nobody would notice, but I did notice that priority had dropped off. And that's why I'm glad that the department is here today, because seniors represent 20% of Nova Scotians. But the budget for the Department of Seniors, it's like 0.25% of the overall budget, a couple $1 million on an almost $11 billion budget. So, you know, I don't always like to draw a line between things, but when I see that the priority of caring for seniors is gone from the main literature that the government's putting out, and a small budget like that for 20% of the population, it gets my attention. And even in the budget for the Department of Seniors for this year, $2.7 million, when I look through that, 1.5 million of that 2.7 million, 1.5 million is administration. And only 1.2 million is grants for seniors programming. So really what we're talking about is 1.2 million of an $11 billion budget is allocated for grants for 20% of the population. 1.2 million in grants for our entire senior population. Does that, like, what's your reaction when you hear those types of things? It troubles me.
Thank you. It's due to the way that the role of the Department of Seniors is designed within government. The Department of Seniors, for the most part, is a policy central agency whose job it is to design and lead policy frameworks directionally for government. But the delivery of all the programs related to seniors rest in those subject matter expertise departments. So nursing homes are run by the Department of Health, housing is run by Housing Nova Scotia, where there's the expertise to run those programs. So we have by comparison, maybe a higher administrative budget, because most of our work is policy work done by policy analysts, and we need to pay the salaries of the policy analysts. We have a few programs that we run that are best suited to be in our department, like senior safety programs, some age-friendly grants, but most of the work of the department is policy work, working with other departments, and we lever the horsepower and the budgets of those other departments. So a large proportion of, for example, housing units at Housing Nova Scotia are for seniors, but the budget rests there, the staff rests there, we work with them. Same thing with $800 million budget for continuing care. The Department of Health, devoted almost exclusively to seniors, rests in that department and not with ours. We're actually lucky that we have a Department of Seniors in Nova Scotia. We're one of the few provinces that do. Ontario just added one last year, but before that, we were the only province that had a standalone department just called the Department of Seniors. In Alberta, they have seniors in housing, and when we talk to that department, the only thing they do is seniors housing. They don't work on other seniors issues like transportation or increasing the workforce participation of seniors. So when we go to these federal, provincial, territorial meetings, most provinces look at our arrangement with envy that we have a dedicated department and a strong mandate to work with all departments across the province.
Okay, so how much of the budget would you say your department is helping to lever towards seniors? How much of the $11 billion? Do you have a guess as to how much? How much
is spent on seniors? Yeah. We've tried to do some basic analysis there, but it gets too complicated to try to. The exercise would be quite lengthy and challenging. We'd be making quite a few guesses. For example, there are some types of activities that we do, we don't know what proportion of the population that uses that service is over 65, because we don't ask an age question, and so on. So there's not an easy way to determine that work. But we know, for example, of the $4 and change billion budget of the Department of Health, a large, reasonable proportion is going to seniors. We know that about 60% of Housing Nova Scotia's units are devoted to seniors, and so on. So there's that type of work. And in the tax system, we know that a certain amount of tax credits and so on go to seniors, but the exercise to actually come up with a defined number would be quite large.
So the 1.2 million in grants that your department has, that's just a stopgap, because nothing on any other departments addresses that issue, so we need to put some money in your department for that program?
In part, it's that we're the best place for that to rest. We don't primarily want to be a program delivery department, in that if there's a better place, if there's a new housing program that we're working on developing, we'd rather it go to Housing Nova Scotia. In the last budget, we got some new funding for transportation. We didn't want to deliver the funding. Culture, Communities and Heritage is delivering it. So where there's expertise in those departments, we'd rather it be there. But many of our grants have helped deliver commitments in shift, and we find they're better off there within our department, where we understand what we're trying to achieve under the plan, and we have a lot of expertise and connections in seniors markets and with seniors groups. The senior safety program, for example, rests with us because Department of Justice is not in the grant delivery business to communities, so it's a better place to be with us. And it keeps us connected with what's going on and with our partners, which is not hurtful as well.
You mentioned the Department of Health. I did some math, and the $1.2 million in grants that your department has control over, the Department of Health budget will consume that much just in the 2 hours we're here. So the $1.2 million, that's what the Department of Health will consume in the 2 hours this committee is meeting. But that $1.2 million in grants that your department has, it's interesting because there's about 200,000 seniors, I guess, 188,000 seniors. And if you take that 1.2 million in grants, it kind of works out to $6.59 per senior per year. It's about the cost of buying every senior in the province of Sandwich. I mean, would we be better off just to take that grant money and give every senior in the province a $10 Tim Hortons card?
Well, using that money, we also do a number of things like create a positive aging directory. We use the money within the department to advance initiatives like this that do have a cost in horsepower and in money to do, that many seniors get to benefit from. So I think this has, and we publish about 60 or 70,000 copies of this for 170,000 seniors. So we have a good reach with this, and it's good product. Plus, we also use the funding to leverage. We grease the wheels of progress on our shift strategy, and there are initiatives there that maybe government can't do it alone, like supporting healthy, active living for seniors. So community groups come to us and say we're willing to put on a walking club to help exercise and stay healthy. Supporting communities to be able to do those types of things is helpful for us.
Okay, the grant application for the department grants. The last question on the score sheet for that, it relates to the budget of the program that somebody's applying for. And the question is, to what extent is the use of the resources efficient? And that struck me as an interesting question when I think of the way that the department is structured, where most of it goes to admin, and 1.5 million to admin and 1.2 million to programming. If an application came before the department that had that much administration versus that much delivery, would that be something that would pass the muster?
I would say proponents aren't really designed like government in that they don't have policy work to do and so on. We're designed by the nature of who we are as a policy department within government, and our budget is appropriated and arranged accordingly. I would say that we have been able to add to, we're not ashamed that we've been able to add to the budget of the department by adding a few FTEs to do more policy work, because it's through this policy work and working with departments that we're able to move the markers. But the cost of administration per se in our budget, I believe, is smaller than the 1.2. Is 563, but that includes there's maybe some more though for the other salaries. So
Okay. So the department is leveraging the whole of the government to get services for seniors, and the ballpark of how much of the budget ultimately goes to seniors services. When you look across the whole of government, it's difficult for you to say.
the total budget of the province, 11 billion?
Yeah, how much goes to seniors?
There would be mechanisms to ballpark it, but we'd be taking some wild guesses because there are many services the province offers, and there are many costs that are hard to allocate to individuals, like who's driving on the roads and so on. It gets to be you'd be making some pretty wild guesses and need some assumptions, because you can't who's driving on the roads, for example. You wouldn't be able to say that we just apportion it by proportion because seniors are driving less maybe than other people. It'd be pretty difficult. Some departments like housing, for example, know exactly that 60% of their housing units are seniors. So on a department-by-department basis. Some of them know, and some of them is pretty hard to. But the reality is seniors are a large part of our population, and they sometimes require services from the province, so it's not insignificant.
Okay. On the policy side, do we have enough long-term care beds in the province?
On the issue of long-term care, there are policies led by the Department of Health, but I can say as the Deputy of Department of Seniors and seeing the correspondence that come in to my minister, we get correspondence from seniors asking about their care in the future, and we don't get a lot of correspondence from seniors saying, build us more long-term care beds. The predominant nature of letters we get from seniors are that they want to continue to stay in their home, in their communities, and they're looking for a lot of support for services to stay at home, as well as the types of support in the communities like designing age-friendly communities that they want to continue to stay in what we call aging in place. And aging in their community is the predominant view that we get from seniors and the stakeholders that we deal with. Okay, thank you. So would your department be advocating for any new government-funded beds for seniors of any type? Would you be advocating? Is that something you'd be pushing for, or do we have enough? The province right now is renewing, the Department of Health is renewing the continuing care strategy, which is the strategy that determines basically how much you spend on home care and nursing home, the right proportion of them, and on what types of things you spend them. The previous 5-year strategy has reached its end, and government is looking to renew the next 5-year strategy, though that's exactly the type of analysis that they're doing, and we are taking part in some of those conversations to try to figure out, for example, what types of supports. There's an interplay between traditional nursing care in homes, like nursing, home care, but also we're finding there are other issues like needing services like snow shoveling and so on to be able to leave the home. There's an intersection between the types of things we do to create age-friendly communities and the need for care services in the home, because we're going to get to a point soon where painting the fence and shoveling the driveway may be just as important for someone to continue to age in their home as is nursing care. So there's an interplay that the model in the future may become, it's not for me to predetermine, but the model may change and drift over time to be reflected that people are living so long now that their ability to take care of the home may outlive their ability to stay healthy in the home.
Is that something that you would advocate for funding available to seniors for those purposes?
I think we need to look at being open-minded about our model of funding and what we need in terms of services. I think there's different models out there, and there may be community supports that might be available. We have some communities, for example, who go to their seniors communities, look for volunteers who can help out seniors in the community. There's a role for supporting volunteerism and community action there as well. So we need a good portfolio of many different things, including designing age-friendly communities where communities are walkable, to be a good complement with home care programming. So I think our role would be to work with them to make sure that whatever they do is a good fit within the portfolio of all the things that seniors need to stay to continue to live in their home.
Is that, you mentioned some of the maintenance around, I have seen that. I've seen talking to people in my own community. But is that, would that be, what would be the major problems you hear with people aging in home? Would that be it? Just general stuff around their home? Is it maybe outside the home or is it inside the home? What are the major problems you hear with people aging in place?
There's some the work's been done by the Department of Health in looking at home care, actually listing out and figure out what are the things that make you not being able to stay in your home. So that type of analysis has been done. In our work that we do around creating age-friendly communities and working with our partners, we do find that property maintenance, there was a pilot run in 3 communities last year of seniors navigators. This was in Annapolis Royal, New Ross, and in Guysborough County. And I asked them after, I was interested in their experience and what they've heard and what they've learned, and I asked them what was the #1 unmet need in their communities, and it was property maintenance. So property maintenance seems to be growing in the ratio of things that make you lose your independence, because people are living long enough to do that. Through what we do to tackle some of those things, we're interested as part of our plan in looking at new types of community support. There's this great, a neat idea that's come out of Japan called time banks, which we funded a project in Cape Breton to try out this year. A time bank concept is one whereby someone volunteers to an organization, and they count their volunteer time to be able to trade it in later. It's easier to explain with an example. Let's say you're not mobile, you're in a wheelchair, but you can bake. You can bake 5 lasagnas for the Boys and Girls Club. They're worth $10 each, you've got $50. That gives you $50 in the bank. Then when you need your fence painted, someone else in the community who will volunteer comes and paints your fence, and they've got $50 in the bank. In Japan, where they've been doing this for 2 decades, people volunteer a lot in their early senior years, build up a big balance in the bank, and in their later senior years, when they have more needs, they cash it in. We'd be really interested to see what the Nova Scotia version of that could be, and so on. So there are programs that the province needs to offer, and there are sometimes some things that we need to find how to create the enabling conditions for the community to mobilize to provide services, because sometimes they can do a better job than we can, perhaps.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it time to bring back the senior secretariat?
Well, the senior secretariat, the Department of Seniors per se has replaced the former role of the senior secretariat as a full department with a full deputy minister, and the ability for me to pick up the phone and call other deputy ministers is the leverage that we need. We also have an annual meeting of the Group of 9, our permanent Seniors Advisory Council, with the ministers of relevant departments on an annual basis to make sure we're continuing to keep in touch, and then we're working with all those departments and keeping the lines of communication open. So I'd say the Department of Seniors is doing more than the former senior secretariat did as a smaller office. Now as a full department, I think we bring the weight of the full department, and a mandate letter from the Premier to our minister that says we have a job to lead the design of senior-related policy in the province.
Okay, so does the department have a 5, 10, 15-year plan to meet the needs of older Nova Scotians? You mentioned some interesting concepts you're obviously looking at and thinking about, but have you pulled them together in a plan, or is that the...
I would say SHIFT is that plan. It's the first 3 years of the plan, but the policy commitments in SHIFT, there's 12 policy commitments. The policy commitments are far-reaching. We thought, like, what do we need 10, 20, 30 years? And the policy commitments are designed with decades, the whole demographic shift in mind. The actions, we've picked off 3 first years and said, here are the actions we're going to do in the first 3 years, but the policy directions in it, we believe, are lasting for several decades.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. We'll now move to the NDP Caucus. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm interested particularly to know more about your role vis-a-vis housing issues, and of course housing issues are related to continuing care in many cases. 44% of seniors living alone in Nova Scotia are facing either a housing adequacy or affordability issue, and 36% are dealing with an affordability issue. What does that statistic mean for the Department of Seniors? Are you worried about the well-being of seniors in terms of their ability to afford to live, or afford to live out their senior years in an adequate home?
Yes, affordability certainly is an issue for us, in that we made a commitment in our plan that we would look at the issue of poverty and affordability, especially housing affordability. It was one of the commitments in our plan. That was a big driver of and entered into the calculation of the province offering increasing the basic personal exemption by $3,000 in the last budget, which added up to $85 million in cost/investment from the province. A large proportion of that is going to seniors. It kind of flies a little bit under the radar. The reality is government could have made another choice and given the Department of Seniors $40 million to work on poverty, which would have sounded like a lot of money, and we would hire dozens and dozens of staff to deliver it. The reality is, with one flick of the switch, we can change the tax code, which put those $40 or $50 million straight into the pockets of seniors without the administrative cost of us delivering it. But certainly, living in poverty is an issue. In our work, we found there's a linkage between our 3 pillars of our plan. Our plan is focused on the economic and social contribution of seniors, helping people live independently and live healthy, active living. But living healthy, for example, requires eating good diets and engaging in recreation, which costs money. and it requires good housing, which costs money. So being able to create age-friendly workplaces where people can continue to work as long as they want to create the revenue to buy the things they need to live healthy is part of the plan. So all the pillars kind of play with each other. There are big issues around people living in poverty, also often living in isolation. Social isolation may actually be, over the next 20 or 30 years, the largest policy challenge of governments to solve, both federal, provincial, and municipal. The federal government has taken on social isolation as their #1 top priority. Studies show that living in social isolation for seniors is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that is the potential health outcome of living in social isolation. So we're also looking at things like how to create connections between seniors, get them out of the home, things like transportation options for them to move around, engage in the community are important as well. We are also, through the plan, levered a significant amount of funding for housing, for seniors in housing as well.
So related to that again, you at the beginning spoke to a number of new developments in housing, including specifically one in Antigonish. Are those in Antigonish, I understand, or I'm sorry, maybe it was Mahone Bay, you were talking about new builds of senior appropriate housing. In the other projects, are we talking about rent supplements, or are we talking about actual new builds?
All of the above. In the budget, there were 3 or 4 different items related to housing from Housing Nova Scotia. Some included building new builds, some included renovating existing units, and some included rent supplements. So they've got a full suite of things, and I'm pretty sure they increased the budgets in all of those areas.
And a lot of that money would be flowing from the federal government with the National Housing Strategy.
That's right. The timing for us was good in the launch of our plan, that we were able to lever, for example, in our plan, I believe out of the first $5 or $10 million in provincial money, we were able to lever $20 million in federal funds during the life of our plan.
Related to that, to your comments about social isolation, I note in England now they've actually created a Department of Loneliness.
Minister of Loneliness.
Minister of Loneliness. And I have to say, like, these are real issues that I see in my constituency. I have a number of seniors' manors. Seniors' manors are public housing, so they are affordable because they're rent geared to income. But I'm wondering if, from where you sit, you're aware of what I am seeing, which is that as our population ages, as really long-term care becomes a destination for the very frail, for the very sick, there are seniors who are living in public housing until they're actually, well into their 80s, into their 90s, not well, possibly with dementia. I actually, know of a case in my constituency where a gentleman in his 80s with Alzheimer's moved into public housing, and that's great, except that there are no staff, there are no recreation programs. There is no support for that gentleman other than that his housing is affordable. And I'm wondering what kind of conversations you're having with Housing Nova Scotia about how we tool up our seniors' manors to actually make them complete communities for people who actually have quite a hard time getting outside of it in many cases.
We've had those types of conversations. I remember speaking with someone in the housing business once, talking about seniors housing, and I said, what are the biggest challenges for you in seniors housing? And the comment was, it's less and less being about the house and everything about the ecosystem of services around the house. So seniors housing is becoming less and less about building the building and more about what do you put around the building, such as availability of services, ability of community transportation, programming, access to caregivers, and so on. Of course, we need to build the units themselves, and the design of the units over time may change to favor more social interaction. I've been also working with private sector people in the seniors business who approach the department and say, we want to get into this senior housing stuff. We don't know a lot about seniors. What can you tell us? And we encourage them to look into the principles of age-friendly community design, which the World Health Organization promotes, and that we in the department are developing promotional materials to work with municipal governments on designing age-friendly communities, which is not just about infrastructure, it's about all the services that you need to surround the housing to make sure that people have access to what they need.
Well, I would suggest that in Halifax now, we actually have hundreds of units of seniors housing which need to be retrofitted to create those ecosystems of support around them. Because I have constituents who are in their 70s supporting neighbors who are in their 90s. Not necessarily in really good situations. You know, it's not an ecosystem of support. It's sort of survival within those buildings. How many units are allocated throughout the province specifically for seniors under Housing Nova Scotia?
I believe it's about 60% of 11,000, which would make approximately 7,700 out of 11,500.
And how many of the units are barrier-free and fully accessible for people with physical disabilities?
I don't have those statistics in front of me, but we could access those from Housing Nova Scotia and share those with the committee if they should like.
Okay. Yeah, I would appreciate that. Are you able to break that number down by housing authority?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
Again, housing would have that. We usually get enough information to help us make our policy directionally how to direct our policy, but we don't have those here. But my staff might, or Department of Housing certainly would have that.
Okay. What are you hearing about satisfaction with continuing care for those seniors who are living independently? Are you getting copied on correspondence related to continuing care experience and satisfaction?
We do get some. Often that goes directly to the Department of Health, but the Minister of Seniors often gets copied on a lot of correspondence back and forth. I haven't seen a lot related to the quality of care specifically, but we do know there's been a great demand for home care, and the province's priority over the last few years has been investing in more home care, and I believe the budget has increased by $60 million in the last 3 or 4 years, which is on top of a $300 million budget. That's quite a significant increase, and the wait times have gone down quite a bit. So in terms of the issue of wait times for home care have improved significantly over the last few years. So I'm not seeing a lot of traffic over for correspondence, for example, on having to wait long wait times, which might have been the case a few years ago.
So as we talked about earlier, loneliness and social isolation are a significant issue for seniors. And a continuing care assistant might be the one person entering a home on a regular basis. One of the things that I'm hearing is that, in fact, it's often a different continuing care assistant at each visit, to the extent that the senior can't even keep track of the name of the person who's coming in and doing personal care for them. Is that an issue in your view?
I think it's an issue, and it's an issue that's been looked at. The Department of Health has worked with their home care providers over the last couple of years on improving things like scheduling and so on, to try to, for people with dementia and so on, changing caregiver on a regular basis can be a challenge, obviously, and trying to reduce the amount of time that people are traveling in cars, getting from location to location. So I think they've achieved some efficiency improvements over the last few years, but it's not an area that I can go into a lot of detail on.
Okay. On the age-friendly community grants, it's not a capital funding program. It can't be used for operational funding either. It covers salaries or honoraria, professional fees, materials, meeting, convening expenses. Can you give us some sense of the demographics of the individuals benefiting from the projects undertaken through these grants? I mean, are we looking at the younger, more active senior? Are we looking at the
a bit of everything.
Who are we looking at?
I would say we probably have quite a bit of variety in range. There are we get requests for grants to do Meals on Wheels to help support more aged seniors who are in their homes and require that support. And on the other hand, we get grants to support walking clubs for people who want to stay active. And we've done grants. We love doing intergenerational work. So we've given grants in the past for youth to provide training at CAP sites on internet skills and digital literacy to older adults who want to learn how to use the internet and use technology. So the main beneficiary needs to be an older population, but we're not terribly worried about the definition of 65. If a group wanted to come forward and they wanted to focus on helping 60 to 65-year-olds find work after being displaced, we would be happy to support those times. It's an older population generally, and the 60-year-old will become a client of the province as a senior, formal senior over 65 in a few short years. So as long as older adults are being helped, we're fine with that.
I worked previously in the nonprofit sector, so I was aware of people, submitting applications for these sorts of things. And of course, there's always a desire to package something as new and innovative in order to, be granted the money. But in fact, a lot of the needs are just ongoing, and a lot of nonprofits are chronically, performing a lot of services with not a lot of resources. What is your view kind of moving forward? Is it going to be, do you expect that projects will get sort of maintenance funding if they show great success? Are you expecting that you might scale up or scale out projects that are showing impact? Are you even tracking the impact of the projects?
We are, and it's certainly a challenge for us. If we were to say, with our small budget, that we were prepared to fund operating funding, it would mean we would start the year with no new money. We would be funding everything else, and all the new ideas that we want to experiment and pilot and try out, like things like time banks that have never been done before, we wouldn't have an opportunity to try something new. And the reality is we probably need to continue to try to find new things. We're facing a demographic shift we have never ever seen before in our history. So hence, it's not through the pages of history we're going to find out what we need to do. We need to come up with the brand new solutions. And as the oldest jurisdiction in North America, because us and New Brunswick and Florida, we're all tied for the oldest jurisdictions in North America, we're at the coalface of this change, and people are looking to us to be the innovators. So while it's unfortunate we can't give maintenance funding, we probably do need to keep enough money out there to do pilots and new things and so on, which we're doing. Certainly, I think over time, as the population ages, we will need to understand that there are some things that are maintenance funding and that aren't transitional. I mean, there are needs that people will incur, like the need for home care, that you can't just give home care for a year and walk away. So for that, something like that, it's regular operating that goes on until you don't need it anymore. So we probably need to continue to explore which one's which one is the need for regular permanent operating. Transportation is an example. We launched, as part of our plan, we got approval for another $2.4 million in community transit, not just for seniors, it's for everyone, but seniors are a great beneficiary of that, and it's not one-year funding, it's ongoing funding, because we realize this is something we need to do and need to continue to do.
In case you weren't aware, Chebucto Connections actually ran a time bank for a number of years, so you might...
We know that. I read the... Sorry, speaking out of turn.
No, that's okay.
I read the evaluation, actually.
It has been done.
I read the evaluation.
It has been done. I know the social worker who ran it for a number of years. So in the SHIFT plan, again, kind of back to housing, one of the specific actions that I guess was undertaken in 2017-2018 was reviewing the statement of provincial interest on housing to determine if it adequately directs municipal planning and zoning to support a range of options that bridge the gap between independent living and long-term care. I would like to understand that, so if you could explain it to me.
Sure. Statements of provincial interest are tools by which the province outlines a clear policy interest and works with municipal governments to try to get them to help deliver on it. For example, statement of provincial interest on floodplains gives guidance to municipal governments that when you're doing your planning, make sure you don't plan for housing in floodplains, for example. The other types of statements of provincial interest, the Department of Municipal Affairs, we've been talking to them about the effectiveness of those and how they can work and what they're doing. So that work is still ongoing right now. The challenge in part is that statements of provincial interest only apply to municipalities who do formal planning. If you don't do formal planning, it doesn't apply to you. So it's a bit of a blunt instrument in terms of achieving your policy goals. It can be helpful, but it doesn't cover all the ground. So they're continuing to do work, and we have a committee. There's a committee of which we have a staff person on who works with municipal affairs around statements of provincial interest. They've been explored on things like healthy active living, housing, and so on. So that work's still ongoing. I think the interest of the Department of Municipal Affairs is to beef up the planning capacity and work with municipal government to increase their planning capacity so that these types of mechanisms can work better in the future.
Can I ask, I mean, as you talked about, there's a need for community transportation, there's a need for active walkable communities. Many people certainly point out to me, and I can see examples of a provincial government either ignoring actual municipal planning or else just showing a preference for the low-cost, by-the-highway interchange recreation center, which actually does not support an active, walkable community. We see that, certainly you have seen it in the case of rural schools, but I think we also see it in hospitals, we see it in recreation facilities and so forth. Is the province, I guess, living up to its own direction when it comes to supporting, supporting zoning that does create a potential for people to age in place beyond the years when they can drive a car potentially, and so that they're, and also just promoting health throughout life by encouraging people to engage in active transportation?
I think that's one of those things, because it's spread all over government. I would say that's one of those things that we're continually advocating for. So someone asked us once, what we do for a living. We're influence peddlers. We go to other departments and work with them to try to influence their policies. But we do have a couple of mechanisms formally to try to advance that. Number one is we fund municipal governments to design age-friendly community plans. We give municipalities $20,000 grants for the walking around money or the cost, or to hire a consultant to go and work with their community to design the planning around what their community needs to be. And those plans can include, if you're building new recreation, here's the best spot in the community. If you're building new transportation, make sure it goes here. So those plans we fund with municipal government and are happy to do more, because we think it's an important part of creating the winning conditions for people to age in their home as long as possible, to make sure that the recreation is connected to the transportation, connected to the walking path, connected to the park, and so on, and that the seniors housing is in the right place in the community. So we're often working with that. To formalize that mechanism, a part of our plan, we've prepared a MOU with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, and it's ready. We haven't launched it yet, but we will very soon. And that it will be a formal collaboration between us and municipal governments to advance the types of issues that help seniors in their communities, including looking at things like zoning. We have R1 zoning in parts of the province where you can't have a granny suite in your basement, yet we're hoping people can. Yeah, it's not 48 yet. What do you?
I had 46. I had that. I started at 26.
What are you doing?
sorry. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. We will go to the Liberal Caucus. Who's up for the Liberal Caucus? Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sometimes we like to sit here and have a little bit of fun too, Thank you very much, Mr. D'Entremont, Mr. Nanji. I think probably for me, I'm probably the only senior actually sitting here today. I shouldn't say that, but maybe I am. I'll give everybody a compliment. Your department certainly is intertwined within government. There's no doubt about that. Public accounts is a place to learn, for sure. And we always have questions. I think it's very interesting the way that you're answering the questions to show how integrated you are within all of government. And I would certainly say, certainly also by the way you've been addressing most of the questions so far, it is a big priority of government. And I do want to commend you on the work that is being done right off the top. one of the most interesting questions, I think, right off the bat was one, and I'd like to go back to it. It wasn't, was the fact of what your clearinghouse for seniors, per se. You work with the Group of 9, you work with, you're intertwined, you're the front door, I would say, of government for seniors. And you've probably heard an awful lot in the last few years, and we have come a long ways. But what was interesting, and I'd like to go back to, is what you said that you hear from seniors. And they say a lot, I'm sure they do. But it's important for us here to also know what you're hearing. We hear what we do in our constituencies on the ground, but can you frame to me what the major concerns, what the major focuses that we should be putting towards seniors with government that you're hearing?
Great. When we did our consultations for the SHIFT plan, we went out to a number of communities. We went out to 8 geographic communities: Yarmouth, Kentville, Bridgewater. You can just imagine what they were. And we also reached out. We wanted to make sure we didn't leave voices out that deserved a voice that might not just show up to a regular meeting. So we reached out intentionally to First Nations communities, African Nova Scotians, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI, immigrants, francophones. Hope I didn't miss one. To have those conversations as well. And we asked them, what's on your mind? Some of the big trends of things that came out, I'd say 20% of what people asked for was, wouldn't it be great if there was a place you could call to find out where you can XYZ, volunteer in your community, get access to services, find a caregiver. The reality is it exists. It's called 211. So it's a great product, and we are a big believer of 211. To the point where, but the awareness in some markets is less than it should be. So this last winter, we ran a 211 promotional campaign promoting 211 in seniors marketplaces. And when we do our positive aging directory, we give them a banner on the bottom, and the bottom of every page, it says call 211. Because while we have a paper directory for people who want that, the electronic 211's our electronic version, and 211 is our telephone version of this. They can do a much better job, many better hours of service. They have access to 22 languages. They do a better job. So we promote 211. So information clarity is a big deal for seniors, and us promoting 211 is our major intervention, and publishing with the directory, which we're happy to send to MLAs as many as they want.
So can you tell me how 211 works then? So if I have a community event in my area that's going on, is that something that you would be able to find through 211?
I'm not sure community events, it's more geared towards social services. So ongoing social services. So if you have a social service, if you need to find out where the local food bank is, where you can volunteer in your community, where you can help, someone can help you start a business or whatever, those are more the services around 211 rather than current events. But they also update their databases on a regular basis and so on. And they actually do a little bit, you gotta be careful about advertising this a lot. They have a number of people who social isolation is a big deal, who actually call in and they just want to talk. And they're very gracious about this. They'll actually engage in the conversation, and they have some regulars that call and they'll engage in the conversation, but at some point you have to say, I think we need to go now. But they don't say, you've reached the wrong phone number, call somewhere else. They're very sympathetic that way. They also give us a report every year on how many seniors called, what they called for, what their met needs were, what their unmet needs were. They're quite scientific and very rigorous in their evaluation work they do. So they're a partner for us, and a very valuable partner. We get good data that helps us design policy. The other types of things you asked, what types of issues may be raised. I mentioned earlier community transportation. I would say it was one of the big ones. The more we talked to departments and seniors, we said, what are the top 3 things for seniors? And they, depending which department we talked to, they would say it's this, and transportation. It's this, transportation, and this. It wasn't often number 1, but it was often number 2 or 3 in multiple places. So tackling community transit and adding more capacity for transportation options for an increasingly aging population is clearly important for us, because it's one of the #1 things that makes you lose your independence, and especially in rural Nova Scotia, is losing your ability to drive. So building transportation is important. And I'd say the #3 one is ageism. which just is discrimination on people because of their age. It cuts across so many things. It undermines seniors' ability to get their wishes of their health care respected as they get older. It undermines seniors' ability to go to a loan and get a bank to start a business. And why would you want to start a business? You're 66 years old. The reality is 25% of people between 65 and 69 are still in the workforce, and 25% of those are self-employed entrepreneurs versus a 9% entrepreneurship rate for everyone else. So getting a loan at the bank is an issue for seniors. And if they face age discrimination, that's a problem. So we ran an anti-ageism campaign last winter. You may have seen a clip on TV of a swimmer in a pool, Ron Allen, who's 71, who's a triathlete from the South Shore. We need to continue to put images forward of seniors who are breaking the mold of the perception of older adults as dependent and needing a lot of service to that of being powerful asset and ally in our communities.
Okay, I'll come back to the ageism I like to, but just on the communication side also. These are a lot of things you're hearing directly from seniors that are writing into you and communicating through when you're out on the roading that. The group of 9, how often do you engage with them, and what are some of the things that you're hearing from them? They're an integral part of our understanding of the nuances in the senior community.
Yeah, Group of 9 is a key ally for us. We meet 8 times a year but a lot of phone calls in between. I speak to the chair pretty well every week, and they're great collaborators for us. So the Group of 9 is our permanent seniors advisory council to the department. They're made up of 9 organizations, 2 members each, so it's an 18-member panel, and we get together. The benefits are on both sides. The Group of 9 is a window for us into the minds of seniors when we're designing new programs and policies to be able to say, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think? And it gives us a good head start on where to go. But the Group of 9 is also a window for the seniors community into government. So they represent 110,000 seniors in the province who come to them and say, this is what's on our mind. They pass that on to us in the form of strategic priorities. So every year they hear from a lot of different members, this is what's important, this is what's important. And every year we go through a process of prioritizing what those things are. So driving the shift plan, supporting health for seniors, supporting caregivers, these are the types of priorities. So they give us a little bit of a there's a million things we could do for seniors. They kind of whittle it down and say, we think those are the priority areas, and we put some extra effort in those areas on their behalf.
Okay, back to ageism. Certainly we know that in the workplace, be it in government or the private sector, it's a concerned area. We have a lot of good examples of things. I was talking to one of my colleagues this morning who had mentioned Home Depot, how it's such a wonderful example of how people that have retired can go back into the economy and be productive. But there are still challenges within the civil service, within, you can get time off to look after your children, but you can't get time off to look after your parents in some cases. What are we doing, or what do you contemplate as some action items around ageism in the government sector and in the private sector that we might be able to do better?
In government, for example, the Public Service Commission has launched an association, and one of the commitments of SHIFT, actually, it's called a flex work arrangement. One of the things we need to do for older adults is we need to keep them in the workforce as long as possible. It turns out from a workforce situation, the workforce participation of people average age 35 to 55 in Nova Scotia is the same as every other province. But older adults, persons with disabilities, African Nova Scotians, and youth, we have a less workforce participation. We need to continue to work on the workforce participation of older adults, because as many jobs as we can create in those other underrepresented areas, if there's so many people retiring on the other end that as a net to the province where we have a workforce participation issue. So we are working on that. The flex work issue I mentioned at the Public Service Commission is important, because some of the ways we're going to keep older workers in the workplace is to be more flexible on how they can work in their later years. The reality is many people in their 50s want to get some time off to take care of parents in their 80s. And sometimes their employers are not accommodating those needs. So rather than getting 80 or 90% of an employee, they're getting 0% of an employee because they leave. They leave to take care of their parents for a decade, who eventually move on or pass on, and then they try to re-enter the workplace in their 60s to try to make up the time and face discrimination, age discrimination, because they're too old to be entering the workforce. So those are issues. We need to work on, as you mentioned, we can get more time off, take care of our sick kids than our sick parents, yet the number of people over 65 last year in Canada surpassed the number of people under 14. So we need to modernize workplace practices. So we're doing a big piece of work on that. We're working with Labour and Advanced Education and the Centre for Aging at the Mount. And we're doing research on what the best practices and barriers are for workforce participation of older adults. We plan to turn that into some actions of new policy directions or potentially new programming. And we plan to roll that out around the province to see whether or not we can move the markers with. There are some great examples of how you can bust the myths. BMW, the automaker, about 10 years ago, one of their HR people said, we've got an aging workforce. This is going to be a big problem for us. So they actually purposefully created an assembly line made up of a workforce that was 10 years older than the average, just to see what would happen. And they found that for $30,000, 20,000 pounds in the day, in small accommodations like orthotics, rubber mats, and changing stools and changing the workflow, they actually increased productivity by 9%, totally dispelling the myth that older workers are less productive. So there's great practices have been done. We need to look into those, and we need to find out what policies and programs we need to do. We've also developed with Labour and Advanced Education a free module that employers can get online on how to create age-friendly workplaces. We're also training the frontline staff of Nova Scotia Works on creating age-friendly workplaces and how to work with employers to retain older workers. So we just need to, we're doing quite a bit, and we need to keep the pressure going because it's going to be an important part of our economy. We also, if I can add, we also need to dispel the myth that older workers are taking jobs away from youth. This has been studied to death by economists, and they've actually given it a name. It's called the lump of labor fallacy. And the lump of labor fallacy is basically the presumption that there's a fixed number of jobs, and if you give a job to someone, you have to take it away from someone else. But the reality is, a school teacher who retires at age making $80,000 and replaced by another one making $40,000, you've taken $40,000 spend out of the economy, even though you got technically the same number of jobs. It's true at the micro level. A younger teacher can't be in a job that the older teacher is still at, but at the macro level, we need those older workers. In the UK, they did a study and found that if everyone stayed in the workplace 1 year longer, their GDP would grow by 2%. In Canada, the workforce participation of people 55 and older is 54%. It's 62% in New Zealand and Netherlands, like the leading jurisdictions. And in Canada, they figured out that if we had the same workforce participation of older adults as those leading jurisdictions, the GDP per capita would go up by 2.8%. So clearly, older workers is a winning scenario for us. And as the oldest population in the country, we need to be working on that actively, which we are, and we're going to need to continue to do more.
Thank you. So, as I open my statement, I believe there's 9 different departments and corporations that work directly with the seniors, with your department. So integrating all of the different approaches towards dealing with these problems is one that you take the lead on the policy side of it. How do you interact? Just for example, okay, so $13.6 million was put into the SHIFT program a year ago. We're at that anniversary here today, and I believe that there were at least 12 large commitments and 50 action items that were part of that action plan. And again, that's not directly in your department. That's across a lot of departments. How do you work directly with those departments? Is there a regularly scheduled meeting? Or is it part of your deputy minister's forum? I'd like to better understand how that's coordinated.
Sure. We have a number of mechanisms. Sometimes we have, on particular files like transportation, we have an interdepartmental working group where we have someone on that committee, but also CCH is there, municipal affairs. So some pieces of work just need their own spin-off committee. Faizal also, his job is to do we call it kind of doing the rounds with executive directors, understanding what they're doing. Part of our job is for other departments to know that when they're designing seniors-related policies or issues to give us a call, and that's success for us. When EMO calls us and said, we're developing a new brochure around what to do in an emergency, can you sit on our working group so that we don't end up with a guideline that says if there's a fire, run out of the house. Well, run out of the house doesn't work for everyone. So that's success when they give us a call. One of the other mechanisms is for the 1-year anniversary, we sent out a number of templates to all the departments who made commitments and said, report back on your commitment. Where are you at? So we're in the middle of that process now. And the other thing I do is as a deputy, I do the rounds. So twice per year, I go visit all the deputies who have commitments in the plan and say, how are we making it against your old commitments, and what else are you working on that we can help with? So a lot of it is just creating that awareness. The most important, impactful maybe tool that we have is the Premier's mandate letter to my minister. The Premier's mandate letter to the Minister of Seniors says, one of your mandate items is to lead the development of aging policy for the province of Nova Scotia. So that is our license to go to other departments and says the Premier wants us to work with you to cooperate on seniors policy. The trick for us is not to become the seniors police. If every time we pick up the phone and the other department says, oh my God, the Department of Seniors calling, what do they want now? You know, that's not the type of partnership we want. We're sharing intelligence, sharing information, and we need their help. We're working on older workers. We need the expertise and the statisticians over at Labour and Advanced Education who are experts in workforces to help us back. So it's a mutual relationship.
The probably last question I'll get in. Certainly not least, wouldn't be here. Nobody else has talked about our senior safety program, and to me, our conversations go back quite a while ago. Probably one of the first conversations that we had was around senior safety, which, you know, it's been in my community, I think, probably one of the longest, if not, it was the first place it was launched, I believe. And I can't underemphasize how important that is. And some of the concerns that we had were it should be everywhere, not just there, and we understand it needs to come from the community. It can't be driven down by government, but more importantly that they need to have some stability there. And I know I might have missed it in the budget this year, but correct me if I'm wrong, but did we ever extend the commitment from a 1-year annual replace, you know, turnover that they had to apply every year to a longer term? And what is going on in the senior safety program provincially? Is it growing? And because to me, you know, I'll certainly put a shout out to all the senior safety coordinators. That is truly one of the best expenditures of government money, I would have to say, in my community.
I'll give it to you. Bar none.
So are we growing that program, and what's it look like today?
So we are a fan of the program. Minister's a fan. We're all fans of the senior safety program, which is we have senior safety officers, which we fund in community to help those communities, help seniors on safety issues. And safety, we let the community decide. Is it financial fraud? Is it burglaries? You decide what it is. But basically, we made a commitment in the plan. We had 5 counties. Wrong plan. We had a commitment in the plan. We had 5 counties that were unserved, and we made a commitment to add the program to those 5 communities. We also made a commitment to increase 1-year contracts to 3-year contracts, because you know how it is for NGOs and small communities. Once you've got someone good, if you need to keep them, you need to offer them some employment security. So we went to 3-year agreements, and we actually added some budget to our budget to bring the coordinators into town together to train together as a community of practice. So I'll let Faizal comment just on the 5 unserved counties.
I'm sorry, the time has expired. We'll move back to the PC caucus. Mr. Houston.
Gee, well, maybe you can answer this one to get some airtime. The positive aging directory, I think it is a good tool. Is it mailed to every senior in the province?
Mr. D'Entremont.
We don't mail it to every senior, but we do make copies widely available. Doctors' offices, pharmacies, MLA's offices, and we're prepared to send as many boxes to anyone who asks for one as needed. We put them in strategic areas where people can pick them up. And people can call in and ask for a copy, and we will mail out individual copies if someone calls asking for one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Has the department considered creating a list kind of approved contractors or, you know, something? Because one of the things, I was here, the concern is that seniors get scammed, really, right? So is there any role for the department in looking at approving contractors, caregivers, cleaners, kind of the list goes on, but is there a role for that in the department?
We've talked about it. It's a daunting task to go through the process of certifying private sector people and the liability that comes from the endorsement of government of private sector people. So we tend not to do that. There are some organizations that can assist seniors, like Efficiency Nova Scotia has certifies installers for energy efficiency that seniors can apply for example. So there's a little bit of that. But we do fraud education through the senior safety program, which we just mentioned, where people can be helped and coached a little bit on how to find good referrals and save contractors. There's also a project we're funding in Dartmouth called, I believe, is it Dartmouth on the Main? Is that the one run by Ocean View, whereby in return for a small fee, seniors contribute to a pool of money and get access to discounts to people who've been certified as good employers and had senior safety checks and these types of things. So we've talked about it and it's done in various areas, but we haven't done it as a department.
Sometimes if seniors want to get some work done, you want to get a grant. The grant becomes available for the lowest bid. Go get 3 bids and then they'll approve some kind of a grant for the lowest one. But I'm just, you know, that's not always the best way, and that's why I'm wondering if we can protect seniors a little more by having that type of a list or having some kind of a role. But it's a good idea, I guess, but it's just not something that government can do. Would you say? Or?
Yeah, I think it would be pretty daunting task to go through the process of interviewing, safety checking, certifying the potentially thousands of different services that companies would want to do. Us as a department, as a policy department, I think that would be well beyond the scope of what we have the horsepower to do. But if community groups, organizations wanted to come forward and apply for funding for us and they thought they had mechanisms to do that type of work and help out in communities, that's something we'd be possibly interested in talking about.
What about the role of technology in closing the gap between seniors and their family members who often might be in another jurisdiction? You know, there's all kinds of technology tools, GPS, or, you know, you can have GPS on watches and cars and door jar alarms and this type of stuff. But that technology is expensive in some cases, too expensive for the family members to afford. Is there any consideration to? I have a couple questions about involving the family in the process more, and this would kind of be the first one. Is there funding available for families who want to put some of those technology assistance in the homes of seniors? I 100% agree on the potential role for technology going forward. There are a few programs that the province offers, like the $400 a month caregiver program. There's also a $500 a month program for people with terminal illness. Is the caregiver program, can you get that for a family member? You can, that's for that one. You can. The way the $400 a month caregiver program works is there's a means test on the senior. And if the senior can't afford to buy caregivers, the $400 a month goes to a caregiver that they have. So those types of funds could be deployed to technology if that's what they felt that the best use was, or the best way to do some caregiving. We're such a fan, actually, of the role of technology that we had our 3rd Silver Economy Summit this year in March, and the theme of the Silver Economy Summit was the use of technology in aging. So we actually brought companies from all over the world came, and we had Nova Scotia companies do presentations on the types of things that they're doing. We wanted to give an audience to great Nova Scotia companies who are developing technology. Because we have one of the oldest jurisdictions, many companies are looking at Nova Scotia as a great place to grow their aging business, and there's probably a technology edge to that. One of the big issues in technology is probably going to be that the number of seniors is growing, but the population of people under 65 is shrinking. So the number of people under 65 available to take care of the people over 65, that ratio is going to get stretched and stretched. I was at a conference on aging, technology and aging, last fall, and one of the interesting observations was
is there a role for technology to apply a multiplier effect to for younger people to take care of more older people? But I think the most interesting sub-observation was that we have a social isolation challenge. Technology replacing human interaction would probably not be a good direction. The holy grail will be technology that enhances human interaction. Rather than an app with you've got remote monitors on your parents and you've got a phone and an app, rather than an app that says your mother took her pills at 9 o'clock, she's fine, and that encourages you to go to bed is probably not the right thing. An app that says your mother took her pills at 9 o'clock, it would be great for you to call her before going to bed. You know, technology that promotes interaction rather than replacing it is probably the holy grail technology rise for us.
But there's no funding for families for those types of technology that even exist today. The caregiver allowance, the threshold's very low, I think, the income test.
Yeah, the income test is I think the LICO one, the low income cutoff. I'm not aware, other than the caregiver programs, which are means tested though, they're so that people who can't afford them otherwise might have access. This is an emerging area. I think it's going to grow quite a bit, and we'll have to do some thinking of government. I think more and more the issue of supporting the caregiver, not just supporting the senior, is going to be integral part of directionally where we're going. The caregiver, over the last 10 or 20 years, it seems every policy decision or trends in community kind of suggest the caregiver can do a little bit more. We're getting to the point that the caregiver is going to be a very valuable resource for the province of Nova Scotia with an older population, and we need to start providing supports to caregivers to do their jobs, and that's probably directionally where we're going. Whether or not providing technology aids and subsidizing technology aids can be part of the winning conditions for us is possible, and maybe there's a cost avoidance business case that if a nursing home is $70,000 a year, maybe a small investment in technology to avoid the move to the nursing home will be a wise investment for the province someday.
Are you doing those analysis?
In some ways, we're looking at what our options are and so on. A lot of these technologies are not very mature. There are privacy issues and so on to plow through. So I think it's going to take us a bit of time. But there are already things, for example, like wearables. If you've got someone with dementia, rather than putting in an institution and locking the doors, put a bracelet on them with a GPS. You can actually buy the technology. You can go on a map and identify the perimeter where it's okay for them within that perimeter to walk around. And when they walk outside the perimeter, you get a phone call or a text message.
In terms of the supporting caregivers, I agree with you that we're going to have to find different ways to support caregivers. Obviously, just straight up money is one of them. In a world where, you know, a CCA could cost 30, 40, 50 bucks an hour, but there's family members there that are able and willing to provide care for their loved one. Is there a consideration of paying the family member like 20 bucks an hour or 22 bucks an hour or something to provide those services that, you know, they're maybe providing anyway?
Our foray to date on that has been the caregiver benefit, the $400 a month, which the eligibility for that has recently been expanded to hopefully get another 600 people to be eligible into the program.
So how many would that be in total then?
I think there's like, don't quote me on this, it's in the one between 1,000 and 2,000. Like I think we've got like 1,500 people maybe in the program now.
So
and looking to add, we can get that number, but it's in.
So if that's let's call it 1,500 for the sake of argument, and we expand it and we get 600 more people, it's 2,100 people, but there's 190,000 seniors in the province, right? It doesn't seem like that's much penetration into the seniors market. Why would that be? Is that because the income test is too low?
I don't know the answer of how changing that. I think they're using low income cutoff, which is the standard income test, but whether or not using the low income test is going to be sufficient to meet our needs of supporting caregivers in the future, I can't predict what that is.
I guess
we are unique though, and we're the only province with a caregiver benefit, and most other provinces are quite envious of our leadership position there.
So we would have 2,000 people eligible for it at $400 a month, right? That's the investment in helping seniors with any multitude of things, right? Could be technology, could be actually somebody to come into their home and help them with something, right? It's a lot of seniors that don't have access to that, I guess, and don't have access to probably anything in the absence of that, if that's the only.
We do spend $360 million on home care. So this is just a little bit of an add-on to provide relief to the caregivers when they're family members and so on. So it's directly tackling that family member issue, but there's a large number of other supports for older adults to continue to stay in their home, including things like the affordability of staying at home is an issue. So fuel tax rebates and property tax rebates and these types of things. There's a large suite of investments that we make, but the caregiver is the benefit, is the foray into helping family do it. And this is probably something we're not going to be doing less of in the future. We're probably going to be doing more. Again, focused on the key importance of caregivers as in their role in an aging population.
Okay. The 211 number, it only directs people to government and nonprofit services, I guess. Is that true? It wouldn't, if somebody called there and asked how they access some service, if it's not provided by government or a nonprofit, then they're not going to get that recommendation.
I think ballpark, yes. I don't think they focus on private business services, but between the nonprofit sector and government services, there's quite a breadth of services there. But I'm sure there's some other things that, like private sector businesses and so on, that aren't targeted.
Mm-hmm. But if they're looking for a specific I guess I'm trying to figure out how do you know where to go, right? So you might have the aging directory. You might have it if you were somewhere and picked it up because it doesn't come to your home, or you might call 211, but you still might not know where to go. But I sense a bit of a gap there. But you think there's pretty good coverage?
There's pretty good coverage. I mean, they have a long list of volunteer organizations. They know the government programs fairly well. If you're looking for private sector services, they have 4,000 in their database, so it's quite broad.
Okay. Thank you.
It's the Honourable Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. I want to return back to, we haven't talked about it a lot just because you had indicated that it's not kind of in your wheelhouse, especially when you're dealing with the shift action plan, and that is long-term care. I know you indicated that a lot of the correspondence you receive, the letters you receive in the department deal with, what services are being provided. Can you improve on this? They, individuals want to stay in their homes longer, and I would 100% agree with that, and I know that that's the case. To this day, I still haven't met a senior or an individual saying, I can't wait to live in a long-term care home facility. I haven't met that. I've engaged with a lot of people in this role as a paramedic, as a first responder. I still haven't found anybody just waiting for the day to get into a long-term care facility. But you can't, with the sheer demographic numbers that we're facing, I don't believe that we can look at, as a province, just a couple of areas to support seniors and especially with their housing needs. I know long-term care has been an issue for a number of years, and caregivers have been playing an important role in trying to support their family members and trying to keep people in their homes longer. So I do want to know why long-term care is not in your realm of maybe why shift avoid it. It's not in that shift plan. Have you been told that long-term care, that's a health issue, leave it to the Department of Health? I'm concerned that those 1,100 people who might not be writing a letter to the Department of Seniors because of cognitive, medical, physical reasons why they're on that list, would be, if you did receive a letter from each one of those, would that change what you would advocate for? Those people need influence peddlers, as you indicated also, right? And my concern is that the government has taken a stance. We know that. But your department, could influence the Department of Health, saying, listen, we cannot just ignore that and put all our eggs into one basket into improving home care and those services. So just maybe another input from yourself on why long-term care was not part of that shift action plan?
As a good observation, there is actually a commitment around the continuing care strategy in the plan. So when we're developing the plan, we went to all the departments and said, what are you doing? What are the issues and so on? Department of Health's position at the time was the continuing care strategy is expiring right now. We made a commitment to come up with a new one. It would have been premature for us in our plan to indicate what government's commitment was around long-term care and continuing care and nursing homes if we're just on the cusp of coming up with a new plan. So we couldn't predict what it was. All we did in our plan is we said there's a new continuing care strategy coming out, and that was the commitment in our plan, and that'll be coming out very soon, I expect. So we put a placeholder for it, saying there will be a plan, and when that plan comes out, it will become part of our plan, because our plan is an iterative plan. We're open to continuing to tweak it, advance it, add things as we go along.
So will you play a role in trying to make sure that that continuing care plan recognizes the demand? And listen, I was there. I know that the cost of adding long-term care beds to our province is significant. It far outweighs the cost of improving and expanding home care services. I understand that, but it doesn't, I think we're failing our seniors if we don't move both those initiatives forward in some capacity, and we haven't over the last 5 years, and it doesn't happen overnight. The creation of a new facility, for example, or increasing new beds, it takes planning, which usually takes a couple of years, if not more. So I'm worried that in 3, 4, 5 years, we're going to be even farther behind at meeting the needs of those 1,100, and that number is, yes, there's 1,100 people on the list, but there's many, many more who are just hanging on, or their families are hanging on because they're providing that care. So are you going to play a role in ensuring that long-term care is the influence peddling that you have and the ability to do that, that you do reflect the needs of those 1,100 plus people who are waiting today for long-term care because they've exhausted home care, they've exhausted their family members, and it just takes one fall, one illness, a month of a progressive disease for them to be put on a list or their needs increase over what they've been dealing with over the last little while.
I can't disagree with any of your statements in that there will be a role for institutional care for seniors. There's bound to be. As you mentioned, there's a predisposition for seniors to want to stay at home, and they advocate for that, but that's not going to work for everyone all the time. So there's a role for institutional care. We have been working with the Department of Health, and we'll continue to do so because it's one of the commitments in our plan, and we continue to be able to pass on the feedback from our group of 9 on the types of things that are important in care, and how do we get the right balance, and how do we support people. So those are the types of conversations we have from the group of 9, and we're able to pass that intelligence and feedback back onto the Department of Health and work with them on things where we can also contribute, like the role of technology we just talked about earlier in home care and helping people stay at home, and all the other tools that help keep people at home, like tax rebates, and Housing Nova Scotia provides grants to seniors to be able to make changes to their homes. Those are all the portfolio of things that help, and we're always try to stay plugged in with all those things, new changes, and try to advocate for investment.
And I know your department was co-located with health for a number of years. Is that cost the barrier? Is that why we haven't seen any real change in seeing increase of long-term care beds in the province? Is it the cost factor, saying, okay, let's try all these other services and improve those, because the cost is a barrier. I mean, you can't hide behind the fact that building a long-term care bed itself, and I'm trying to recall, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I mean, it could be significant. It could be $150,000 to $250,000 a year for one bed. So I know that's significant if you're going to create new beds. So do you think that has been a barrier in maybe not looking at why we haven't seen an increase in long-term care beds in the province?
I can't comment on whether or not, was not privy to the conversation or whether or not we should spend it on this versus that and whether or not the financial pressures are an issue. All I can say is, from my perspective, the advocacy from the seniors and seniors groups is to support to stay at home. Okay. And that's where we've been putting an investment, which is not unwise based on that strategy. As well, the province is working on its new 5-year continuing care strategy, which will give policy direction to how you should spend your continuing care money. It's 800 and something million, and it will decide, do you spend it on home care or nursing homes, or what's the right balance and how you spend it. So given those two things, that we've got a continuing care strategy that will be out soon to provide policy direction on what you should do, and the fact that seniors are advocating for staying at home, what we've been doing currently of spending more money to keep people at home doesn't seem unwise in that scenario.
No, and I appreciate that. Just to emphasize, to keep in mind that often the people who need long-term care can't advocate for themselves, and their families are so busy that writing a letter to the government is just not in their wheelhouse for that day. You know, feeding their mom or dad or family member is and we need to make sure that their needs are met as we move forward. Talking about the respite care, and we know seniors are living longer, and seniors are taking care of seniors longer now, and this is not a new thing. I mean, 20 years ago, as a paramedic, going into a home, seeing someone who's elderly, who's exhausted because they're taking care of an older parent, has its challenges. And I know the caregiver allowance has been something I take very much pride in, knowing the initiative and bringing that forward and making sure that people have some access and some relief. But it's been a number of years since that program has been initiated, and I know there was a small expansion here, but is there any discussion or any thought around lending more support, as my colleague mentioned, to those caregivers, those people who are one, saving the province a lot of money for maybe their loved ones not being in a long-term care facility? Is there any new ideas, new programs that will support those, especially for respite? Sometimes it could be just 3 hours a week, and they may be over that threshold, that means test for low income, that could significantly improve their ability to continue to care for that senior in the years ahead. So has there been any initiatives looking at how do we support those caregivers who may not meet the criteria of some of the programs that we currently have?
Yeah, I think directionally support for caregivers is where, we're not going to do less of that. And I think we are doing some thinking, and we'll continue to do thinking about the role of caregivers in supporting an older population. They're a key asset of ours to the point where we need to start thinking of them as, with our caregiver benefit, we need to support them, not just support seniors. We are doing some work with Caregivers Nova Scotia to try to work on some of the supports that they need. These are institutional improvements and awareness and information. They're not providing direct supports, but they have a very strong organization, and we were happy to support them through our age-friendly grants, for example. And they're a key partner, and they've come in before to the Group of 9 to do presentations, for example, on what they see as the trends in caregiving, and advice to us on things that we can do. There's things they suggest to us that we look into, for example, is the taxability of some of these caregiver benefits, and whether or not getting the benefit is going to increase or impact your eligibility for other programs. We look into those things. We need to create a path for caregivers that makes it as attractive as possible for them to stay engaged in their work. Like you say, respite care. Losing a caregiver for us is a loss we probably can't afford to do. So I think on the caregiver side, our policy directions will continue to drive to more support.
And I know we've talked about this, it's been talked about for a number of years. If you look at Veterans Affairs Canada around their VIP program, I mean, it's hugely popular. One, because it does help with those tasks of lawn care and painting and snow removal. Meals on Wheels, it's in certain regions. To what degree do you support those organizations? Most of them depend on volunteers and donations. Is there any support? I don't recall hearing from the organization in our area about provincial support, but it's an important one. people being able to gain access to make sure that they have these hot meals, healthy meals on a regular basis during the week. Any support from your department on those types of programs?
We haven't done an ongoing support. We don't have ongoing funding, but we have funded pilots and new trials of new ways of doing things.
I'm sorry, time has expired. Move to the Liberal Caucus. Mr. McGuire.
Morning, gentlemen. Good to see you here today. I know we've had a lot of conversations over the last few years on seniors and how to move forward with an aging population. And I know I've been in your office dozens of times along with phone calls and emails. And so I just wanted to speak about aging in place. First of all, I do want to thank you for the massive amount of consultation that was done for the SHIFT program. I know that you came to our community led by Marjorie Willison, and we're glad to have someone like Marjorie in our community who speaks for seniors, and along with many other things. But I know that, for example, the Captain Williams-Briar was packed with seniors, and they left feeling that their voices had been heard. So huge appreciation for that. I always go back to, when we talk about aging in place, I always go back to the program that maybe I'm been a little bit obsessed about over the last few years. I see you smiling. But I do see us moving in that direction, and the program's called Capable, and it's based out of Baltimore and Johns Hopkins. It was designed by Johns Hopkins University. Baltimore, as we've been through, is one of the poorest municipalities in the entire United States. They had a massive problem with long-term care and seniors beds, and the program was designed. Originally, it was a trial to see exactly what seniors needed in order to get the best possible care. And what they discovered was that for a significant savings, they were able to provide more services for seniors to have a longer and healthier life. And what they did, as we've been through, is they provide those services in their homes. And so they went, so some of the stuff that I was looking at was between 2012 and 2015, the seniors that were enrolled in this program, only 2% of them ended up in long-term care. The seniors that were in this program aged 65 to 100. They completely, my understanding from the research that we did, they completely, if they didn't completely, they came darn near close of eliminating their long-term care or bed weight, and it was little things. And, you know, we've met with the Group of 9 a few times, and I've had the conversations with the Group of 9, and it always comes back to the little things. And it's the same thing that they found out in Baltimore, and Capable is now spreading throughout the United States, especially in the low-income jurisdictions. They're seeing it in places like Flint, Michigan, and other places like that, where this program or a version of this program is being rolled out with huge success. So I look at what's happening there, and then I look at what's happening here, and I see snow removal. One of the biggest things we heard from the Group of 9, one of the biggest things I hear from seniors in my community. Can't get out of their house. If they can't get out of their house, it leads to depression. It leads to social exclusion. And that obviously leads to deterioration of health, which has a huge impact on the healthcare system. Little things like mowing my lawn, you know, cleaning my house. Being able to get into a shower. What is the department, what is your department doing to emulate some of these programs that we're seeing throughout the United States and throughout the world, but particularly in places like Baltimore and Johns Hopkins University? What are you doing to take that evidence or taking those programs that work and implementing them here in Nova Scotia?
Mr. D'Entremont.
Thank you. So we've been doing some work, for example, studying the programs that already exist that do this type of work. There's a program at the Health Authority called the IADL. What's the I stand for? I know ADL is Instrumental Activities of Daily Living, where they fund...
We need a better name.
where you fund the non-health issues that impact being able to access services, transportation, snow shoveling, these types of things. The United Way also ran a program here in the city where they offer for low-income snow shoveling services and so on. So we're having a look into those to see which ones of those and how they might be replicated in the province. We're also advocating with the folks at the Department of Health who are working on the continuing care strategy, which will decide how home care and nursing homes run in the future, about which they're with us on this, is diversifying the view maybe of home care as a nursing service or a health service. The reality is the objective is to keep people at home longer. We're getting to a point, people are living so long now that their ability to do the house maintenance chores is as much a deterrent to living independently as getting sick from a health perspective. So we need a diversified model going forward of what types of services people need to stay at home. We need to find out what the most effective delivery mechanism is. Is it giving the money to the Department of Health to offer it a service, or is it paying the United Way or community-based organizations to provide those services? Do we income test those services to make sure that you can target the funding to those people who need it the most? Do we give them the money to hire the services themselves, or do we go hire the services? So there's a lot of questions to ask, but we're doing that digging, and I think once we find some of those answers, we should be hopefully have an ability maybe to put forward an idea about how to advance that in the province, maybe be on a small pilot scale to learn how it works and then roll it out bigger, or some other way, or change, or influencing the policies of the Department of Health to make sure that they include these types of things when they redesign the continuing care strategy.
And obviously these programs that are based in the United States are a little different than what we have here, because they do have privatized health care, which is obviously a larger cost to the individual. But some of the services that they're providing are things like grooming. So helping seniors with dealing with feet issues or hand issues. It's the testimonial that I've been deep in this, as you know, for a couple of years now, reading and researching and back and forth. The testimonial from these programs are outstanding. So I'm glad to see that we're actually moving towards something like that and kind of creating it in a Nova Scotia model. So one of the things that I feel made that program so successful is that they had the university work with the seniors to create a model, and not just government saying to seniors, here's what you need. So we have, a massive amount of university resources here in Nova Scotia. Is your department, you say you're a policy department, are you working with universities here in Nova Scotia to create similar models or different models that work here for our seniors?
100%. As part of our shift action plan, we set up 3 working groups to work on, because we asked them under these pillars, what are the things we can do? So we've got 52 actions. We actually got a list of 300. And I worked with an advisory committee, like you mentioned, co-chaired by Marjorie Wilson, who's a rock star in our world. You may know her as the gardening lady on CBC, but she's much more than that. She's a lifelong community development advocate and a great advocate for seniors. She's fantastic. But we set up 3 subject matter expert committees to come up with good ideas and good policy directions. We included lots of academics from universities on those working groups. We had dietitians from Acadia and nursing teachers from Dow and so on and so on. So they bring us lots of good ideas. Our latest foray into coming up with new ways of designing policy that is important for us as well. We also have a MOU with the Center for Aging at Mount St. Vincent University, who is a key partner for us. So, because I in my department can't hire a subject matter expert in everything aging, I'd have a staff of 200. We have an MOU with the Center for Aging that I can tap into their capacity to go reach out to the academic sector and tap into any expertise that I need. But our most recent foray into tapping into the expertise of others was one of our commitment in our plan, and that's our Social Innovation Lab. So Social Innovation Lab is the equivalent in business of what a business incubator would be, where you bring a bunch of smart people together and try to work out some problems. And for us, it's social policy problems around aging. So we've launched our first kind of class and I'm using quotes here, and we have 24 fellows, which we selected to come in to be partners in our lab. And it's based on the thesis that none of us are as smart as all of us. Let's get these 24 people, let's give them a challenge around aging, and let's let them, and some of these are academics, some of them are seniors advocates, some of them are just seniors themselves, some of them are youth who are interested around seniors issues. We launched the problem to them, and the way the Social Innovation Lab works is, it's a contrast to the way we traditionally do policy. You know, policy people will sit in a room, come up with a great idea, go get it, concurrence from government, it's a good idea, and then roll out a new program. And you know, preferably we would consult along the way to make sure it's the right thing. But if it doesn't work, you've launched it big and it doesn't work really big. The whole goal of the Social Innovation Lab is, if you're going to fail small and quick. So we asked these 24 people to come up with maybe the best 5 ideas, and then we try 5 prototypes or pilots on a small scale. And if they fail small, and then you pick the best one, and then you scale up the best idea to a bigger way. What you've done there, you've involved the people who are going to be impacted by that policy in the development of it. You've included more people in the thinking and the problem solving, which would presumably come up with a better idea. And you've done the equivalent of consultation by having them involved in it. You know you're not coming up with a boo-boo idea that's just not going to work. So this is a great way forward for us. And we really do need this innovation. As I mentioned earlier, we're facing a demographic shift we've never seen. We're not going to go back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s and find out what we need to do. We're facing a new shift, so we're engaging people and coming up, and we need true innovation, ideas we've never seen before.
So I'm glad that you're working with the academic community, but you're also working still with the individuals on the ground that these policies will impact.
Absolutely.
We have to make sure that, you know, sometimes when we get into these program creations, sometimes people tend to forget about who it's going to impact, and making sure that their voice is heard. And, you know, seniors, you know, have, even after retirement, have a lot to contribute. And I said earlier, before the meeting, I think of what Home Depot has been able to do, which is hire a lot of retired skilled trade people to actually work in their store. And it's probably some of the best and most knowledgeable customer service you'll ever get is when you walk in there. And so they've been able to tap into that experience and that wealth of knowledge. So when it comes to government, we hear a lot of numbers, and we hear a lot of big numbers. And so it's been a year since the $13.6 million was earmarked for the SHIFT initiative. I'd like to know where that money has gone and what it's contributed to.
I'll let you take this one.
And the programs in particular, and the things that are impacting people's lives on the ground.
Sure. I'll turn this one over to Faizal Nanji.
Faizal. Mr. Nanji, finally.
Thank you for that question. And I think as Deputy D'Entremont has alluded to, the investment in the older population goes beyond the amount that was committed to SHIFT specifically. But certainly within SHIFT and the amount you referred to, the 13 million, there's about 750,000 that was directed initially in 17-18. That was spread out over the Innovation Lab, which Deputy Minister talked about. Expanding senior safety programs, expanding our age-friendly communities grant program, promoting and developing entrepreneurship programs and capacity, as well as to support a TEDx conference, and developing some capacity around using technology and building digital literacy.
I'm sorry, time has expired.
Have another 10 minutes.
We do have some time for a closing statement. Mr. D'Entremont, if you'd like to provide a closing statement.
Thank you. It'll be quite short. It's a great opportunity for us to come here and talk about seniors and aging. I think we all have a role on the issues of combating ageism and changing the dialogue away from aging as a problem to be managed to that of an opportunity. I think we all need to contribute to that conversation in our own networks, in our own worlds, finding ways to show seniors that we value their participation through mentorship, entrepreneurship, volunteering, being grandparents, and we need to collectively arguably kind of change the conversation around aging, and we all need to do it for us to make an impact. And if we do so, hopefully we can create a better opportunity for an aging population, and that's our goal, what we'd like to do in the Department of Seniors.
Thank you very much, and thank you for answering our questions today. We have one item on our agenda. There was a motion made at the last meeting that was not dealt with, so it will be dealt with today. Mr. Houston had made the motion. I'm going to ask Mr. Houston to, for the record and for the benefit of members today, to hear the motion so it can be voted upon. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion was to bring the Internal Services Department before the committee to talk about protection of people's Nova Scotians' personal private information. We had the highly publicized FOIPOP breach, where the government had indicated that one single 19-year-old was responsible for this, and they had to kind of save the day, I guess would be the way that the Premier kind of described it. Well, it turned out that there's no charges in that case. We knew there was a number of other breaches, and I just worry about the protection of data across various areas of government. The Auditor General has reported at potential security weaknesses on a number of government systems, and it occurred to me that there's an open date in the calendar. I think next week was open, May 23rd. I think I was looking at the clerk there. So I'd like to see that day filled, and I'd like to see that day filled with the Internal Services Department appearing before the committee to talk about what they're doing to protect Nova Scotians' data. So that was the motion that was before the committee last week when we adjourned.
So the motion, as I understand it, for clarification, is on May 23rd for the Department of Internal Services to appear as a witness to discuss protection of personal data and government response when there is a breach of personal information. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, I'm going to ask for those opposed again because it was not clear to me what the vote was. So all those opposed to the motion, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Okay, thank you. The motion is defeated. Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Yes, I just wanted to add that we're not against having internal services coming here to present to public accounts, but what we do feel is it's important that the Office of the Auditor General and the Privacy Commission do the work that they're doing before that happens. Just wanted to get that on the record.
Thank you for your comments. Is there any further business to come before the committee? Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and in light of Mr. Wilson's comments, I have been through that before. We went down this road with another file, I think on the expenses at the IWK. This committee decided that, well, we'd wait for the Auditor General in that case, and I believe it was almost a year before the Auditor General was able to schedule that audit. I wonder if maybe the Auditor General can inform the committee if he's been able to schedule his review of the Internal Services security, I guess, response to the FOIPOP. Have you been able to schedule the audit with the Internal Services Department?
Mr. Pickup.
Partially, I will define or interpret what you mean by scheduling. So we are well underway now. You know, we have met with the department, we're into it. We're not ready yet to give a date as to when that report will be released, but we are trying to fast track this thing to make it happen as quickly as possible. But yeah, work is well underway now.
Mr. Houston.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that. I would be curious, would it interfere with your work in any way for the committee to meet with the department? Is that something that would trouble you? Or do you have any assessment of whether those two things could happen at the same time?
Mr. Pickup?
I think in terms of what comes before a committee, that really is up to the committee to decide. And, you know, I report to you as called, and I think that's, I won't, you know, I wouldn't have an opinion on that.
Thank you, Mr. Pickup.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Any further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, our next meeting is on May 30th, where we will have the Office of the Auditor General and Mr. Pickup with a release of the Spring 2018 report of the Auditor General. We look forward to seeing you all at that time. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.